In 64 AD, the city of Rome caught fire and burned for 6 days. Not a small fire, not a manageable disaster, a fire that consumed 10 of the 14 districts of the most powerful city in the world. A fire that left hundreds of thousands of people standing in the ruins of everything they had built their daily existence around. The homes were gone, the temples were gone, the streets and markets and gathering places that had organized the rhythms of their lives for generations were ash. And when it was finally over, when the smoke cleared and people walked back through what remained, they found something that nobody had planned for, but that happened anyway. The fire had been indiscriminate in one sense, but in another sense it had been ruthlessly precise. Everything built on a weak foundation was gone. Everything that had looked solid from the outside but was compromised underneath. Everything constructed too quickly or with materials that could not withstand genuine pressure. All of it consumed. What remained were the foundations, the deep stone, the structures built honestly with real materials for the long term rather than for the impression of solidity. And when the rebuilding began, the architect said something to Nero that has stayed with me every time I think about this particular kind of loss. They said, "We cannot simply rebuild what was here before. If we rebuild what was here before, we rebuild the conditions that allowed this fire to travel the way it did. We have to build what should have been here in the first place. Wider streets, better spacing between buildings, proper infrastructure, not a reconstruction of what was lost. A genuine reimagining of what the city needed to be in order to actually last." The Rome that rose from that fire was, in the judgment of most historians, significantly better than the Rome the fire consumed. Not because fire is good. The fire was catastrophic, and the cost was real, and the loss deserved to be mourned. But because the rebuilding that followed was done with a clarity and an honesty that the comfortable preservation of the existing structure had been preventing for years. The crisis forced the conditions for something more genuinely solid to be built. I am telling you this story because something in your life has recently gone through its own version of that fire, and you are standing in the ruins right now trying to figure out what comes next. This video is not going to tell you how to rebuild what collapsed. It is going to tell you something harder and more honest and more genuinely useful than that. It is going to tell you how to build what should have been there in the first place. 7 truths, 7 honest things about what this particular kind of rebuilding actually requires. Not a quick recovery program, not a return to normal in 30 days. The actual lived process of putting yourself back together in a way that is more solid than what was there before. Stay with me through all 7. Because the one you most want to skip is almost certainly the one you need most. If this channel is new to you, subscribe to the Stoic Truth right now. Every week we come here and do this kind of work together. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and let us begin. 1. You cannot heal from something you are still performing past. There is a thing that people do in the aftermath of collapse that they almost never name honestly. They perform okay. They gather just enough of the functioning version of themselves to present to the world, and they hold that presentation together through exhausted will while everything underneath is still completely in pieces. The tired smile. The, just going through some stuff. The careful management of how much anyone actually sees. They do this not because they are dishonest people. They do it because collapse feels like the kind of thing that should be concealed. Because if the wrong person sees how bad things actually are, they might use it. Or worse, they will see you differently from that point forward. The person who always held it together, suddenly revealed as someone who did not hold it together when it mattered. But here is the honest problem with that approach. You cannot heal from something you are actively performing past. You cannot rebuild from a position you are simultaneously denying. The performance takes energy, real energy that your system does not currently have available. And all of that energy going toward maintaining the surface is energy that is not going toward the actual recovery underneath. The French novelist Gustave Flaubert wrote something that applies directly here. He wrote, "Be regular and orderly in your life, so that you may be violent and original in your work." The energy spent on the regularity of the managed surface, the everything is okay that you present to the world, is energy that is not available for the real work, the original work, the necessary work of actually sitting with what happened and beginning to honestly move through it. The acknowledgement does not have to be public. You are not required to announce your collapse to everyone who asks how you are. But internally, privately, with the honesty that only you have access to, you need to stop performing okay to yourself. To be willing to sit with the actual state of things without the management. To feel what you actually feel without the overlay of what you are supposed to feel, or what a stronger person would feel, or what this much feeling reveals about your capacity. Because healing cannot find you where you are pretending to be, it can only find you where you actually are. And where you actually are right now is the only honest place to start. Drop a comment below, not what you are supposed to say. Name the one thing you have been performing okay about that you are genuinely not okay about yet. Just write it, because the writing of it is the first act of stopping the performance. And stopping the performance is where everything real begins. There is also something important to name about why the performance is so hard to stop, because it is not simply vanity. It is not just the desire to be seen as capable. The performance of okay is often built on genuine care. Care about the people around you who you do not want to burden. Care about the relationships you fear the full truth of your state might change. Care about the future version of yourself that you are trying to protect from being seen as someone who could not hold it together. But that care is misdirected, because the people who genuinely care about you do not need you to perform okay in order to feel comfortable around you. They need you to be honest enough for genuine support to actually be possible, and the future version of you that you are trying to protect does not need protection from the current truth. They need the current truth to be genuinely processed, so they do not have to carry it unexamined into the next chapter. The Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano once wrote, "I don't believe in charity, I believe in solidarity. Charity is vertical, so it's humiliating. It goes from the top to the bottom. Solidarity is horizontal. It respects the other person. The performance of fine is a form of charity toward the people around you, a unilateral decision that they cannot handle your actual reality. Solidarity with the people who actually love you requires giving them access to the truth of where you are. Not all of it to everyone, but enough to allow genuine support to flow in a direction that is actually useful. 2. Rest is not something you earn after you recover. It is how the recovery happens. Almost immediately after something like this, the guilt arrives. You are lying there genuinely unable to function at anything close to your normal capacity, and a voice begins. You should be doing something. Other people are managing. Every day you spend like this is a day you are falling behind. The rest is self-indulgent. The rest is something you will regret. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is the same system that ran you into the ground, telling you to get up and keep running. The American poet David White wrote something about rest that changed how I understood what it actually is. He wrote, "Rest is the conversation between what we love to do and how we love to be." Real rest is not empty time. It is the specific quality of being genuinely present with yourself without the demand of performance or output. And that quality, so rare in the lives of people who have been organized entirely around giving and doing and managing, is not a luxury. It is where the recovery actually happens. Here is what is occurring during genuine rest after genuine collapse. Your nervous system, which was running at crisis level for far longer than nervous systems are designed to sustain that, is beginning the slow process of returning to a regulated state. Your mind, which was too overwhelmed to process difficult experiences as they occurred, is finally beginning to do that processing. Your emotional resources, completely depleted by the prolonged demand on them, are beginning to be restored. All of that essential work requires the rest. It cannot happen while you are simultaneously running at full capacity. It needs the space. The guilt about the rest is not happening alongside the healing. It is interrupting it. Every hour you spend in the internal argument about whether you deserve to rest is an hour. The actual recovery work is being prevented. So here is the permission you probably have not given yourself. Rest for as long as the actual recovery requires, not as long as the guilt permits, not as long as would be impressive to people watching, as long as the real biological and psychological work of healing from something real actually takes. That time is not wasted. That is where the rebuilding is happening, even when nothing visible appears to be occurring. 3. The story the collapse tells about you is not the true one. In the quiet hours after something breaks, a story forms almost automatically. The mind, trying to make sense of what happened, constructs a narrative around it. And the story that forms in the immediate aftermath of genuine collapse is almost always the harshest and the least accurate version of the truth available. The story says you should have been stronger, that a better person would have seen this coming, that the collapse is evidence of something fundamentally insufficient about your character, that other people handle things like this without falling apart. These stories carry an almost physical, convincing weight, because the collapse feels like proof, like the collapse itself is the data point confirming everything the darkest interpretation of yourself has always suspected. But the story is not the truth. It is one interpretation of the truth, constructed by a mind in genuine pain, operating with incomplete information from the most distorted perspective available. The perspective of someone standing in the center of the worst of it. And that perspective is missing things that would fundamentally change the conclusion. It is missing the full weight of what you were carrying, the duration of the carrying, the insufficiency of the support actually available, the specific conditions that produced this outcome in a person who, under genuinely different circumstances, would have been entirely capable. The Polish philosopher Leszek Kolakowski wrote something about the stories we tell ourselves that is one of the most honest observations about human psychology I have encountered. He wrote, "The most dangerous moment is when a man has nothing to do and nothing to hope for. In that emptiness, the mind fills the silence with the darkest available version of the story. Because the darkest version feels most true from inside the darkness. But feeling true and being true are not the same thing. The story that formed in your worst moment was written by the most distorted version of you, with access to the least complete version of the evidence. Give it no more authority than it has earned, which is very little. Find the more honest story, the one that includes what you were actually carrying, for how long, under what conditions, with what actually available to support you. That story is more accurate, and it is a far better foundation to build from. Here is a practice worth trying when the dark story arrives. Write it down completely, the harshest version. Every claim the story makes about what the collapse reveals about your character, your judgment, your fundamental capacity, write all of it. And then for each claim, ask a single question. What evidence would a genuinely fair witness, someone who had access to everything that preceded this moment, and not just the collapse itself, bring that would change this conclusion? You will find that the fair witness has a great deal to say, that the story the darkness wrote left out everything that would make the outcome make sense, that the conclusion it arrived at is the only available conclusion if you start with the collapse and work backward, but a completely different one if you start with the full picture and work forward to the collapse as its inevitable result given the conditions. The French novelist Marcel Proust wrote something about perspective and distance that I find directly relevant here. He wrote, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. The new eyes are not ones that see the collapse more generously. They are ones that see the whole picture more completely. And seeing more completely is not comfort, it is accuracy. And accuracy is the only honest foundation for anything worth building." 4. What collapsed was not you. It was what you were building on an insufficient foundation. When people look honestly at the period before emotional collapse, they almost always find the same pattern underneath the specific details, consistently giving more than they were receiving, saying yes to things genuinely beyond their sustainable capacity, treating their own needs as the last consideration on a list that everything and everyone else had priority over. And they were doing this from a belief so deeply embedded in how they moved through the world that it had stopped feeling like a belief and started feeling like just how life works. The belief that genuine needs of your own are a problem, that the good person gives without limit. That prioritizing yourself is a form of selfishness that the genuinely caring person does not practice. That belief, held quietly and acted on consistently, depletes whoever holds it. Because there is no version of sustainable giving that does not require genuine replenishment. Every human being has a real limit. The strongest person you know has one. And the person who keeps giving past that limit will eventually have nothing left to give. Not because they stopped caring, because the resource they were drawing from was finite, and they were drawing from it without ever allowing it to genuinely recover. The Brazilian educator Paulo Freire wrote something about the cost of this kind of consistent self-erasure that lands with unusual precision. He wrote, "Washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful." He was writing about political neutrality. But the principle applies directly to the internal conflict between what you genuinely need and what you have been telling yourself you should not need. Every time you side against your own genuine needs in order to maintain the presentation of not having needs, you are siding against yourself. And the consequence of that accumulated siding against yourself is exactly what you are living through now. The rebuilding requires honest limits, not walls built from bitterness. Clear, specific, genuinely compassionate acknowledgements of what you can offer without running yourself into the ground. "This is what I have. This is what I do not," said without apology. Because that is the structure that makes the rebuilt life something that can actually last. 5. Pay close attention to who showed up and who did not. Emotional collapse is one of the most clarifying experiences a human life can produce. Not because it is designed for that purpose, because the specific circumstances it creates, the temporary unavailability of the fully functioning version of you, reveals something about the relationships around you that comfortable, ordinary living had been successfully concealing. Some people showed up. They reached out without waiting to be asked. They made space for the reality of what you were going through without requiring you to manage their discomfort first. They were okay with you being exactly as broken as you actually were. And some people did not. They became quieter when the useful version of you went offline. They seemed most invested in your recovery as a process of you returning to the version of yourself that was most functional and most convenient for them. They made your difficulties somehow about themselves in ways subtle enough to be deniable but unmistakable once you started honestly noticing. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote something about human relationships that has always seemed to me to be the most honest description of what is being revealed to you right now. He wrote, "Once the realization is accepted that even between the closest human beings infinite distances continue, a wonderful living side by side can grow." He was describing the specific peace available when you stop expecting people to be capable of things they are not capable of. When you stop measuring what is real against what you hoped would be real. Not everyone who was present in the life that collapsed belongs in the life that is being rebuilt. Some people were present specifically because of the version of you that had no limits. The rebuilt version, with honest limits and a clearer sense of what it genuinely needs, is a fundamentally different proposition. And the response of the people around you to that different proposition tells you directly who is genuinely invested in you as a person. Choose who comes with you carefully. Not from bitterness about who did not appear, from clarity about who did. Here is also something worth sitting with about the people who did not show up. Most of them are not villains. Most of them are simply people who are themselves operating from their own unexamined limitations. Their capacity for genuine presence in someone else's difficulty is limited by how much of their own difficulty they have been willing to genuinely look at. The people who find it hardest to sit with your pain are often the people who have the most unprocessed pain of their own that they are working very hard not to feel. The French writer Simone de Beauvoir wrote something about human relationships that I think applies exactly here. She wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." The principle extends far beyond gender. No one is born capable of genuine presence. It is built, or it is not, through the specific experiences and the specific willingness to examine those experiences that produce the capacity for real connection. Some people have built it, some people have not. And the collapse has given you, uncomfortably and at real cost, the specific information about which category the people in your life fall into. Use that information, not as a weapon, as a map. 6. Inside what broke you is the foundation of something that could not have been built any other way. This is the step most difficult to talk about while the pain is still recent, because suggesting there is something valuable inside the collapse can sound like minimizing the cost of it. So hear me say clearly first. The collapse was not good. It was genuinely costly. The disruption was real, and the pain was real, and every bit of that deserves to be acknowledged as real rather than reframed into something more comfortable. But the collapse happened. And in the aftermath of something that genuinely happened, something is available that was not accessible before. A clarity about what was and was not working, that the comfortable momentum of the previous life was actively preventing you from seeing. An honesty about your actual needs that the performance of not needing anything was successfully concealing. A knowledge bought at real cost through real experience about what you can carry and what you cannot, about who actually shows up, about what a genuinely sustainable version of your life looks like for you specifically. The American writer Zora Neale Hurston wrote something about experience and what becomes possible from it that I find more honest than most philosophical treatments of this territory. She wrote, "There are years that ask questions and years that answer them. The collapse is the question year." Asking questions that the comfortable years were never going to force you to ask, because there was no pressure sufficient to make the asking unavoidable. What have you been carrying that was never actually yours to carry? What have you been giving that was costing you more than you ever acknowledged? What were you trying to make work that was not genuinely working, and that the collapse finally made impossible to continue pretending was? What does the rebuilt version of your life need to look like in order to be something that can actually sustain itself? Those questions and the honest answers to them are the foundation of something more solid than what existed before. Not because the pain was necessary, because the clarity is real. And real clarity, whatever it costs to arrive at, is better to build from than the comfortable illusion of a life that looked intact from the outside, while something underneath was gradually becoming unlivable. You did not see the fire coming, but now you can see what the fire revealed. Build from that. 7. Trusting yourself again is not the reward at the end of the rebuilding. It is the first tool you pick up. Of all the things emotional collapse tends to leave behind, the most persistent and the most quietly damaging is the erosion of self-trust. Because the collapse feels like evidence, like your judgment led you here. Your resilience ran out when it was most needed. Your capacity turned out to be less than what the life you were trying to live actually required. And now you are supposed to navigate the rebuilding using the very judgment and resilience and capacity that apparently could not prevent the collapse from happening. That is a genuinely disorienting position, and it makes the rebuilding considerably harder than it needs to be. The Chilean poet Pablo Neruda wrote something about the relationship between cutting and continuing that I have returned to many times when thinking about this particular kind of damage. He wrote, "You can cut all the flowers, but you cannot keep spring from coming." He was not writing about emotional recovery specifically, but the image is exactly right. The cutting does not remove the thing that produces the growing. It is still there, underneath, moving in the direction of return, even when everything visible looks like winter. Here is what is actually true about what the collapse revealed. It did not reveal that you are insufficient for the life you want to build. It revealed that you are human, that human beings have genuine limits, that those limits, consistently exceeded over long enough, will eventually produce a collapse, regardless of how strong or capable or resilient the person involved genuinely is. The collapse was your limit making itself impossible to continue ignoring, not evidence of a personal failure, evidence of the universal human reality of limitation. The Kenyan activist Wangari Maathai once said something about the relationship between small actions and lasting change that applies directly to the rebuilding of self-trust. She said, "You cannot enslave a mind that knows itself. That knowing does not arrive in a moment of insight. It is built through the accumulated experience of making honest decisions and watching yourself keep the commitments that are genuinely yours to keep." Every time you said you would rest, and you actually rested. Every time you set a limit and held it when holding it was uncomfortable. Every time you asked for what you actually needed rather than performing not needing it. Each of those moments is evidence, slowly accumulating, building a different relationship between you and your own judgment. Self-trust is not recovered all at once. It is built the way anything real is built, gradually, through the accumulation of small kept promises to yourself, one honest step at a time. Extend to yourself the compassion you would extend without hesitation to anyone else going through exactly what you are going through, not as a practice, as an honest acknowledgement that what happened makes complete sense given everything that preceded it, and that choosing to rebuild honestly from it rather than being permanently defined by it is the clearest available evidence of the resilience that the collapse temporarily made invisible. One honest step back toward yourself, back toward the version of your life that is more genuinely yours than anything that came before. There is something about the pace of genuine recovery that almost everyone underestimates, and the underestimation itself causes damage. Because when recovery takes longer than expected, the gap between expectation and reality produces its own secondary suffering. The message the mind generates is that taking this long must mean something is more wrong than it should be, that the recovery itself is evidence of insufficient resilience. But recovery from genuine emotional collapse does not follow a schedule. It follows a process. And the process has its own pace that is determined by the actual depth of what was depleted, not by the timeline that ambition or guilt or external pressure is imposing on it. The person who tries to accelerate past the process's natural pace does not arrive at the destination faster. They arrive at a partial recovery that will require completion at a later time, often at a worse moment, often when there is even less available to give to the work. The ancient Stoics had a concept they called the reserve clause, the idea that when you commit to something, you commit fully, but with the implicit understanding that circumstances beyond your control may alter the outcome. Applied to recovery, it means this: you commit fully to the work of rebuilding, and you accept that the timeline of that work is not entirely within your control, that some of what determines the pace is happening at a level below your conscious management, and that the most productive thing available to you is not to press harder against the pace, but to be fully present within it, to give everything to the process without demanding the process conform to your preferred schedule. The Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore wrote something about patience and growth that I think is the most honest description of what the recovery period actually asks for. He wrote, "The flower which is single need not envy the thorns that are numerous. The pace of real growth is not the pace of urgency, it is the pace of readiness, and readiness cannot be manufactured by force. It can only be allowed to arrive. Allow it, however long that takes." The rebuilding that happens at the actual pace of genuine recovery is more solid than anything rushed to completion before the conditions for solid building were actually present. What is also worth naming honestly about this period is the specific quality of loneliness that accompanies it. The specific kind of alone that comes from being in a place that is genuinely difficult to describe to anyone who has not been there. You can find the words for what happened in the broad sense, but the interior quality of it, the specific texture of what it feels like from the inside, the particular way that your own life feels foreign to you in the aftermath of something that has reorganized everything, that is harder to communicate and harder to receive understanding about from people who have not lived it. The Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen wrote something about the specific isolation of carrying something that others cannot fully access that has always seemed to me to be one of the most honest descriptions of this experience. "Available," he wrote, In the voice of one of his characters, the strongest man in the world is he who stands most alone. He did not mean that isolation is strength. He meant that the person who has been through something that genuinely changes them often finds themselves temporarily in a place of solitude that the people who have not been through the equivalent thing cannot quite reach across. Not because those people are inadequate, because the experience has moved you to a place that requires actual experience of something similar to fully understand. You are not alone in that place, even when it feels like you are. There are many people who have been exactly where you are right now, who have stood in exactly this rubble, who have felt exactly this particular combination of exhaustion and disorientation, and the desperate wish that someone could tell them with certainty that what comes next will be worth what the getting there costs. It is worth it, not because the pain was worth it, because what gets built on the other side of genuinely doing this work is something that the previous version of you, comfortable and not yet tested by this particular fire, was not yet capable of building. The version being built now knows things, expensive things, real things, and those things will be in everything constructed from this point forward. You did not see it coming, not the full weight of it, but you are here now in the aftermath, choosing to rebuild, and that choice matters more than you probably recognize right now. You are not rebuilding what collapsed. You are building what should have been there in the first place. The version of your life with honest foundations that knows its actual limits, that asks for what it genuinely needs, that has been tested by something real and is being built from that testing rather than in spite of it. The Rome that rose from the fire was more solid than the Rome it replaced, not because the fire was a gift, because the rebuilding was done with a clarity that comfortable preservation had been preventing. You have that clarity now. It costs something real to earn it. Use it to build something that lasts. If this video found you at exactly the right moment, if something here named what you have been carrying without quite being able to put words to it, hit the like button now and share this with someone who needs to hear that where they are right now makes complete sense. Subscribe to the Stoic Truth if you are not already here. Every week we come back and do this work together. The next video is already on your screen. Build from what remains. It is more than enough.